This is the Kitchen Sink WP Podcast, episode 367.
I program my home computer.
We have a server crash, 404 error, page not found, links aren't working, system is crashing, system is crashing, system is crashing.
Your old HTML website, barely alive. We have the technology. We have WordPress. A new website, better than it was before. Better, stronger,
Faster. We have the technology. The technology.
Why, hello everyone, this is Adam Silver, the host of the Kitchen Sink WP Podcast. Thanks for being here. Let's get started. All right, starting with upcoming events. Sadly, there are none. None that I know of. No one shared anything with me that past week. Nothing on the calendar for WordCamps, remote, online, or otherwise. So it's kind of a bummer. So moving right along, segment 1 in the news. 2 things to talk about here. First and foremost, WordPress 5.7 release candidate 2 is out. It's been out for just over, coming up on a week. And the final release is due to ship out on March 9th, which is a day after this podcast episode drops. So if you're listening to it on the day it came out, it's going to be out tomorrow. If you're listening to it after, it came out, apparently. So definitely have a backup in place, test some things out, and dive into 5.7. All right, also in the news, WPEngine has a new offering. They just came out with this back at, they had a conference last week, which I mentioned. They announced Atlas. It's the future of headless WordPress. Now, this is above and beyond my pay grade and scale, my knowledge, but it's setting things up for the future to be a new headless WordPress product line. It's a complete platform, enabling exponentially faster dynamic sites with the flexibility and security that comes with a headless solution. So I'll put a link in the show notes for that as well. Pretty cool things coming out in that realm. And is that it in the news? Yeah, that is it in the news. All right, moving on to the meat and potatoes of this week's episode, segment 2, listener Q&A. It's been 8 weeks. I do this every 8 weeks. So I have a couple questions here. I have three questions this week. The first one was actually sent in via Joe Simpson, who's been on the show before, and he's a friend of the show, and he sent it in via SpeakPipe. So I'm going to play his question now.
Hi, Adam. This is Joe Simpson, Castaic, California, part of the WordPress community here in Los Angeles, your former family. We miss you here. I'm a little different from most folks. I'm in a corporate environment. I'm looking to strike out on my own. For someone that's looking to start an agency, what's the big difference or advantage between an S Corp and an LLC? Now, I know this may be too business focused or too specific, but what's your experience with others in the WordPress community and how they start their things up? Thank you so much. Enjoy the show. Take care.
Well, fantastic question, Joe. And thank you for sending that in. Really like to have that voice here. If you want to have your voice, by all means, use the SpeakPipe. And 8 weeks from now, we'll have you out here. Anyway, first, a disclaimer. I am not a tax professional. I'm not offering financial advice or setups for structure. That's not what I do. So this is just information from the research I've done, my experience in running a business for the past, this agency, almost 5 years, etc. Secondly, some definitions. LLC versus S Corp. An LLC stands for Limited Liability Company. It's a business structure that protects the personal assets of the business owners. An S Corp it's an S Corporation, referred to as S Corp or S Subchapter. It's a tax election that allows the IRS to know your business needs to be taxed as a partnership. Now, with that, Joe, there are tax differences between the two, as well as management structures. If the LLC is taxed as a sole proprietor, like mine is, the advantage is that the pass-through entity means I can pass my profits through my LLC members. I'm just the one. I can report the profits on my personal tax returns versus filing a corporate tax return. So, and also in theory, LLC members must pay self-employment tax on their income, which I do. Technically, in per research, to become an S Corp, you have to first actually have a C Corporation or LLC to kind of have that first, and then I guess you transfer it. I don't know exactly how that works. So what's better? Well, of course, it depends in WordPress, especially for entrepreneurs. Filing to become an LLC is a great approach to begin with. I recommend that from the people I speak to in the community. I believe most people start off first and foremost as a DBA, which stands for Doing Business As. And that way you can have checks written out. Checks. I actually said checks. Yeah. Who writes checks? Well, I got one last week, actually. And I have a DBA now under Concierge WP because I get 3 to 5 checks a year. and it's mistaken from the accounting departments. They make them out to Concierge WP, which never existed, technically speaking, because my LLC is actually Silver Lining Productions LLC from 20 years ago. Anyway, I digress. So you can do a DBA. That's fine, but it doesn't give you much protections of your assets. If you own a home or if you have an office building or a space you work in, that kind of thing, insurance purposes. So a DBA doesn't give you any of that. It just gives you the ability to doing business as a different name than yourself. An LLC gives you protections over assets. It's its own separate entity. And an S Corp is the next level up when it kind of comes to taxations and company, and as well as the different, how many members you can have of a company, shares or stockholders, etc. So lastly on this, Joe, I checked out LegalZoom, and there's a nice handy chart, and I'll put a link in the show notes, about the business formations and which ones you might want to consider having by yourself. I would highly recommend, just knowing Joe the way I know him, I think doing a DBA/LLC would be the way to go. Now, that said, I do know that having an LLC in California is not cheap. It's about, I think the bare minimum is $800 a year for that tax base. Whereas out here in North Carolina, I paid $147 last year when I reformed mine out here. I used to have one in Colorado. I closed that one, opened up one here. And then my DBA recently was $26, and that was one time. So there's those cost considerations as well. So maybe you start off as a DBA, as a starting point, then you do an LLC. And I know some people can do LLCs out of state. You can do it in, I think, Nevada, like Las Vegas. You get a PO box. There's a system to do it that way. Some companies do them out of, there's a state in the East Coast, Vermont, I think, or Maine. I don't forget where it was. But there are tax advantages to do it not in certain states versus others. So there you have it. Again, not a professional, just some experience that I know, and I believe that your best bet would be, based on assets, to protect them, is to have the LLC. But talk to your tax advisor and go that route. All right, moving on question number 2. This is sent in by Steven. I have 2 domains and one website. How can I have both domains go to the same place? Well, easy, much easier than it depends, like I just said before. This would be a simple domain forward at the registrar itself, Stephen. I've mentioned before I use hover.com, but it doesn't really matter where you're registered, as forwards are an easy thing to set up and should not cost anything extra. If they do cost more money, maybe move your registrar, because I don't think that is fair at all. As an example, I do this for one of my domains. I own adamislive.com, and I redirect that, or I used to redirect that, to a click-to-tweet service when I was about to go on stage and do a presentation at a conference. It takes me less than 5 minutes to set that up. And that way, I had a slide that says, hey, adamislive.com, go there, and there's a preset tweet. Anyway, domain forwarding, super simple, super easy at the registrar. There you go. And the last question, one more question here this week. Do you have any simple tips for hardening your site against hackers? This was sent in by Shay. Hey, Shay, yeah, I do actually have 3 solid things to consider. First and foremost, hosting. If you can afford managed hosting at all possible, go that way. Totally. What I mean by this is where the host has the core files locked away, pretty much not accessible to just about anyone, even you. I had a server hacked back in September. I've talked about that here on the podcast. I made a switch from shared to managed hosting with that in mind. I wanted to have better security across the board. If you're going to stick with shared hosting, which nothing wrong with that, then maybe subscribing to a service to keep tabs on the site. I use BlogVault, I suggest, and also still use WordFence for some clients, and or Sakuri. Totally worth the investment. It kind of gives you the ability to keep tabs on core files. Any changes, you'll get an alert. If you have malware injected, etc. Huge worth the investment there. Huge advantage there. And lastly, passwords and usernames. Don't use the same usernames on all accounts, even if you're the admin. Obviously, don't use admin, but don't use, B. Smith across the board. Vary it up. Also use strong passwords and change them every quarter at a bare minimum, and then use a password manager to do that. I use 1Password. There are other services and tools out there. Not a problem. Just pick whatever works for you. All right, that's it for that segment. Moving on to segment 3, tip and tool of the week. This week's tip is suggested by my buddy Dustin. He's taking some online courses to learn more about developer things over at hackerrank.com. I have no connection to them whatsoever, but I haven't signed up just yet because I'm not a full developer. He's doing that kind of stuff. It's pretty cool. He's excited about it. It's a place you can go and learn more about code. You can also, I guess, if you're a company, you can hire people that have gone through courses and whatnot. So some remote hiring hiring. It's over at hackerrank.com. Check it out if you're interested in that type of thing. All right, let me wrap it up here. If you have any questions, go ahead and send it in via email, adam@kitchensinkwp.com, or use the SpeakPipe function on the website. If you want to support the show, become a Patreon, kitchensinkwp.com/Patreon. Would love to have that help. If you want to sponsor the show, you can do that too. There's a form on the website. And if you want to talk to me and get some business coaching on launching a side hustle, check out adamsilver.com. Thanks for listening. Now go out and do some awesome things with WordPress. See you next week. Bye-bye.